Okay. Hello and welcome to the first edition of NLNOG Live. We're very excited for this event and we have some really good presentations lined up for you today. My name is Nathalie Trenaman and I would like to first introduce the rest of the team to you. Melchior Aalmans will be your host for today. And then we've got Thomas de Loof and he takes care of all our finances. And then we have Niels Raijer and Snijders, who are also on the NLNOG board and will do a presentation for you later today. We could not do all of this without the help of our amazing and legendary video crew. It's Sven and Denise, and if you have been to physical NLNOGs, you might have seen them before. Today they are entirely behind the screens, and we'll leave them there. Then we have Anna. And Anna is Anna Cox. She takes care of all our marketing and communications. Then we cannot do this without the help of our sponsors. And our sponsors are amazing. They decided to stick with us through these interesting times. And they all announced that they will continue to sponsor us, even though we're not doing a physical event this year. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce the whole list to you. It's Alterna, it's SpeedIX, it's i3DNet, eBay, Juniper Networks, KPN, NLAX, RIPE NCC, PC Extreme, Arista, M6, LoneApp, Cybersprint, RETN, Duocast, Solid Optics, Asteroid, and NLNet Labs. So I would like to express my sincere gratitude for these organizations for sticking with us. Now, NLNOG events, you know, we ask always everybody to treat each other with friendliness and respect. And the same goes for this event. We have limited engagement options today, but we do have the YouTube chat and the IRC channel, #NLNOG. If you have any questions for any of the presenters today, then you can go to these channels. And if you have a question, please state your question with a capital Q before writing your question, so that Melchior, who is relaying the questions today to the presenters, can easily spot them in between the chatter. That's mostly it. We have another thing, and that's on the 4th of September. Normally we would have Podium Mosaic, a physical NLNOG event, not this year, unfortunately. But we do have something really interesting lined up for you with some really cool surprises. So if you want to be in the loop for that, sign up to the email list so we can keep you posted for that. As said, we have 4 really good presentations, I think, and really relevant topics. The first topic was a wish of the whole board for Bits of Freedom to do a presentation for us today and talk us through the latest developments in the whole privacy area, because as you know, Netherlands is working also on a Corona app. So what's the latest with that? Quite a lot of people lost track of what's going on there. So we're very, very excited that we have the managing director of Bits of Freedom with us today, Evelyn Austin. I wish you all a really pleasant NLNOG Live and talk to you later. Evelyn, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for the invitation. I can definitely imagine in all the sort of news chaos that you've lost track. I'm going to try to bring some shape back into it and some focus. For those who don't know Bits of Freedom, we work on defending and promoting 2 rights, the right to privacy and the freedom of communication. We do that with a small organization. We have a budget around sort of $7,000 a year. We're 9 people, 6 more or less full-time. This is more or less how we're financed. Basically, this was the question that you asked me. What's going on? So I want to take you through some of our current work and some of the developments that we see that we're most concerned about. I think even though I can imagine that people are tired about talking and thinking and worrying about COVID-19, we can't not talk about it. So that's what I wanted to start off with. So very early on in the COVID crisis in the Netherlands, so sort of I guess halfway through March when the lockdown started, we were anticipating a few ways that pressure would be put on privacy in order to try to control the outbreak. So, of course, one is insight into our health and health data. The second is insight into people's location and their social network in order to perhaps slow the spread of the virus. And the third one, which is slightly different, was we saw immediately that we became even more dependent on technological tools like the one we're using now to communicate and work. So today I want to talk mostly about the first two. So the ways or the measures that the government has taken in order to gain more insight into our health and more insight into our movements. So there are three main measures that I would like to walk through. The first is, of course, the COVID tracing app, Corona Melder, as it's going to be called. The second is some developments in telecom data. And the third that I'll touch on very briefly is a measure that was taken to gain more insight into our health data. So first of all, of course, the Corona app. A lot has been said and written about it. We have, in a way, enjoyed the discussion. It was really interesting to see sort of national media talking about decentralized versus centralized solutions. That was, I think it has helped to kind of increase the level of discussion about technology, at least. So there are some positive aspects to it. But of course, that's not what I'm here to talk about. So I think it was April 7th, one of the first press conferences, or one of the early press conferences that the Prime Minister and the Minister of Health jointly did. The Minister of Health announced that they were going to be exploring the possibility of using a contact tracing app. And that was something that the outbreak management team had told them that they needed to do. So that was on Tuesday, and then on Wednesday, the following day, we had built a quite large coalition of sort of knowledgeable partners and had put together a manifest or a checklist or whatever you want to call it, a website called safeagainstcorona.nl or veiligtegencorona.nl. And here we said, if you decide that you need to deploy such an app, so a big if, because you have to first prove that it's necessary, that it's proportionate, etc. If you decide to deploy such an app, then it should meet with at least the following requirements. So it was 10, some of them sort of more granular than others. So and also kind of a mix of legal, technical, and kind of more societal aspects, I guess. So that was the beginning of April. The minister had, the ministry organized the appathon that some of you might have followed where I think 6 or 8 different vendors presented their solution. And the minister then decided that actually none of them were suitable or were good enough at the moment. So we weren't going to be using one of those, and instead, and at this point, I think this was the end of April, and there had been a whole lot of attention and also a lot of good criticism of the plans. The ministry took a slightly less visible approach and started working on its own solution and kind of more a little less in the spotlight than the plans had been formulated before. So now we're a little over 4 months down the line, and we have the Corona Melder. So this is the app that the ministry has been working on, together with a lot of very good and knowledgeable technical people, and especially where the sort of technological requirements that Veilig tegen Corona formulated, there's been a lot of good progress. So we've gone away from a centralized approach to data storage to a decentralized approach. The app has been developed more or less from the start, sort of in a completely open or very open way. So that's quite positive. And at the moment, the Data Protection Authority, the Autoriteit Persoonsgegevens, is doing its analysis, and if they, I think it's supposed to arrive this week or at the start of next week, and if they rule positively, the ministry will deploy the app, and it will be available in app stores starting on August 15th. It will be available for everyone, but for people in Rotterdam and the east of the Netherlands to also actually use the app to get in contact with the health authorities, starting August 15th, and available for everyone starting September 1st. So as I said, technically it looks quite a bit better than the where it looked like it was going in April. However, we're still concerned because privacy is more than being GDPR compliant. It's more than data minimalization. It's more than security. It's and this sort of more sociological context or societal context, we feel is still really being neglected. So there are 4 sort of major concerns that we have. The first, and academics have been seeing this really from the start, so from April, the ministry still hasn't explored the impact that having an app like this in society might have on individuals, on our relationships, and on society as a whole. The minister says, well, of course you can't research that until the app is actually up and running. Academics say, well, no, we have all sorts of scientific methods and models to do exactly that. So it's really a shame that hasn't been done more, because I think it could have really teased out some risks that we could have actually avoided if they'd been on the radar sooner. Secondly, and this is a kind of an annoying point to make, but it's odd that we've been becoming as a society more and more critical of the role that big companies like Google and Apple play in society, and at a national, at a European, and at a global level, we see slow but definite progress towards trying to curtail the power of these companies and trying to rein in their dominance. And with this app and with all the apps, all the tracing apps that use the Apple API or that even really rely on smartphones to solve this crisis, you're just growing the reliance that we have on these companies, and especially when it's something like your public health. I really wish that there had been more discussion about that and on its ramifications. Third, we're really concerned about function creep. So we've rarely ever seen any type of surveillance infrastructure or data collection that is ruled out being reversed. I think sort of ANPR cameras, PNR records. There are so many examples of as soon as data is collected or as soon as there is a way to track people or to gain more insight, it will be used in context other than it was intended and by people and organizations that weren't involved in the first place. And then finally, some of these risks could have been addressed at least partly through legislation. So there was an emergency COVID law that had one article about the Corona app or the COVID app, and it was removed quite last minute. It was not a particularly well formulated article or really sufficient to the risk that the app posed, but at least it was something. It's been removed, and we're not sure if anything is going to come in its place. At a minimum, we feel that the app should have a sunset clause. So there should be a moment in time in which we say, okay, now we're going to abandon the use of the app unless we really see through also a sort of a democratic process that we need to postpone using it. Another thing that we find very important is that no one should be obligated to use the app. So the government it should always be voluntary. And also there's shouldn't be any kind of consequences based on you having or not having the app. And then finally, to at least partly address the risk of function creep, it would be really smart to make clear that the app and any data it could possibly generate can't be used in any other context. So, and the context we're most concerned about, or that can have the biggest consequences for people, is of course it being used in the context of law enforcement. So since there's the summer break in Parliament and things won't start up again until after the summer, so in September, we are expecting and hope and will try to contribute to legislation being written then. And in the meantime, there's the ruling from the Data Protection Authority to look forward to. So secondly is the telecom data. So another measure that the Ministry of Health took was an amendment to telecom legislation to allow the creation of a database of mobility data. And the reason they want that is because they want to give the Public Health Authority and the Central Bureau for Statistics insight into that data in order to be able to respond quickly when they see an outbreak in a particular region. That's kind of that's the story at the moment. So here again, really, it's unclear how exactly this data is supposed to contribute to fighting the spread of corona. we haven't heard a lot of use cases or a lot of information about how this data is supposed to be operationalized. And actually, we've heard some sort of contradictory things from local governments who say that they don't really see a way that they could take kind of localized measures. So, for instance, locking down Utrecht or having stricter rules in one town than they have in another. It's also unclear if other sort of less invasive options have been explored, and I think that's also because they're not quite sure what exactly the problem is that they're addressing using this data. So and when you don't have an exact problem, it's also really hard to think of a sort of a range of different possibilities or solutions. And since that's not done or hasn't been done, it's also not possible to say with any type of sort of legal certainty that this is actually a necessary and proportionate measure. And that's the question that you have to ask as a data protection authority, and that we should be asking as a society. The government is allowed to curtail our freedoms if the measures taken are necessary and proportionate. That's the only way they're allowed to do that. So again, this proposed law was met with a whole lot of criticism. It has been temporarily withdrawn by the minister, and I believe he said that he'll take the criticism on board and issue another version of it after the summer. So that will be coming at the beginning of September. So just very briefly, the health data opt-in, opt-out. This was actually one of the first measures that was taken, and there wasn't that much attention for it. It was really sort of in the really early days of the lock-in. If you want to read more about it, this great former physician, Wim Jongejan, runs the website with the awesome name Zorg ICT Zorgen, so care ICT cares. He's written a lot of really smart things about it, but just very briefly, we had the situation where if you wanted to give various health professionals access to your health records, you had to opt in to that sort of information exchange system. And the minister announced that he wanted to assume consent, basically turning it from an opt-in to an opt-out system. So yeah, if you're interested, zorgictzorgen.nl is the place to be. So that brings me, Will, to what's next, I guess. So before Corona or COVID started, one of the things we were quite worried about was the rise of biometric surveillance, and in particular, facial recognition. We've already seen numerous kind of use cases and a very, very strong industry lobby. So I just want to take you through a few examples of how face recognition is being sold. So here is an example of using face recognition to measure church attendance, to be able to find any woman you see and snap a picture of on the street, find the corresponding social media profile. This is a very old example. VK is sort of Russia's Facebook. This is the very friendly looking Face++. I think it's an Israeli company that's being used in China to monitor or surveil minorities. It's being used in India to identify protesters. And I think this is the most cynical and heartbreaking sales pitch. It's a facial recognition company that is targeting schools, saying that use of face recognition software in school corridors will end school shootings. So we were already concerned about that. We did a little test in the Netherlands. We found a publicly available public camera. This is the Dam Square. These are my colleague Lotte and our intern who was leading this research, Paula Hoijman, who found themselves, or sort of, tried to find themselves on the camera, and then used Amazon's free service Rekognition with a K to see if they could identify themselves. That was possible. So all Amazon needed was, I think it was about like 30 by 30 pixels. It looked kind of like this. To identify Paula with 95% accuracy. So this, with more and more cameras in public space, with more and more private cameras also targeted at public space, and with police officers using more body cams, you can imagine that this can very, very quickly become really pervasive. Well, then COVID-19 happened, and then we started thinking of a different type of biometric surveillance, namely the health passport, that has been promoted as a way of unlocking society. So we've seen 2 examples in the Netherlands, but there are many more examples across Europe and in other parts of the world. This is a project by TNO. They've actually been working on this for a long time. Before COVID, it was used on refugees in refugee camps. But this is, it's basically a app that allows you to show if you are allowed entrance to a certain area. So this is one thing that we were afraid of with the corona melder, is that it would act as an entrance ticket. So, for instance, you could imagine that the NS would like to ask you to show if you've been tested recently before you can get on the train. School buildings, office buildings, employers, anyone could use it. Another example is the COVID Bos. So this is a private company. I think they're based in the UK, and they have what they call a full end-to-end global solution to the COVID-19 crisis. So basically it's a digital health wallet, as they call it, and it works in the same way. They claim that they have sold this to, I think, about 15 governments, one amongst which the Netherlands, but it's been very hard to find any useful information about this. So I think, and without wanting to be sort of too doomsday, sort of the pervasiveness of technology, the kind of heightened risk that we feel society is in, and all these different lobbies from companies like this, but also the facial recognition companies, really starts to kind of this sort of the sort of society as a sensor network really starts clicking together, and I think it's really something that we have to think through when measures like a COVID app are introduced, and when we're discussing them. We can't see them as isolated projects or pieces of technology, but have to see how all these things fit together and what level of insight and control they offer whoever operates them. So very quickly, something completely different, but also very, very important. We like the internet, we like content on the internet, we like sharing stuff. And if you're a company hosting content, you also really enjoy not being held liable for the content that users put online. This is is really heavily under attack, both in the US and in Europe. So in the US, we're seeing a revision of the Communication Decency Act. So Section 230, a lot of you are probably very familiar with it, states that no provider or user of an interactive computer service shall be treated as a publisher or speaker of any information provided by another information content provider. And because of the dominance and the disruptiveness of platforms such as Facebook and Google, policymakers are looking at altering this in order to create more risk and liability for these platforms in order to force them to take down more content, basically. So in the States, it's Section 230, and the European equivalent of that is Articles 12 to 15 of the e-commerce directive. And this is something that's already going on and being discussed, but in the next couple of years will be a huge battleground. Like, it will be, I think, sort of GDPR times 100, both in terms of sort of the lobby, industry lobby, but also of the potential consequences if we don't manage to defend the rights of individuals when this is discussed. So that was it for me. Thank you very much for listening, and I'm very open to taking some questions if there are any.
Congratulations on being the first presenter ever at an NLNOG live event. We did receive a few questions. First question is, what is your stance on Google and or Apple's motivation behind providing APIs?
I mean, we can't say anything about their intentions. So two things. I think we've seen an increase in people's awareness about location data, and more people are limiting the use or the access to location data on their smartphones. So a far more cynical person than me would say that perhaps this is Apple and Google trying to find a way around that. And another thing that we should keep in mind is, so we're currently in phase 1. So Apple and Google have said we will allow certain government-sanctioned apps access to that data. But phase 2 is that Apple and Google will offer this service themselves. So you'll have this sort of Bluetooth monitoring running on your phone, and at one point, if someone you've been in the proximity of reports themselves as being infected, Google or Apple will send you a notice saying, hey, perhaps you want to download an app in order to be able to register and to get a test. So already we see that the next step is actually more control towards Apple and Google and away from any government type of app.
A question in that same context is, could you see a situation where the Dutch COVID app is mandated at events with, for example, over 100 people attending?
Yeah, I mean, if I were an event organizer or a company, I would want to do anything to limit my liability. And I think an app like this, where you basically say people's health is not my responsibility, but it's a responsibility of every individual coming, that would be, yeah, I would do it. And if we don't have a piece of legislation saying that that is actually not allowed, of course it's going to happen.
And an internal government decree mandating select parts of the government employees not installing the app due to data privacy concerns. For example, employees in region ministries.
Yeah, we've seen this already see this in other countries where Secret Service employees, military employees are not allowed to download the app. Yeah. I think the Ministry of Defense already has a blacklist of apps that employees aren't allowed to download, and especially with the what was the running app, Strava?
Strava, it's one of the sports apps.
Yeah, I assume if you're not allowed to use that, why would you be allowed to use this?
True. Last question, which was a general question. How is the IGF organized within the Netherlands, Internet Governance Forum? It's more of a general question. Not sure if you have the answer to that.
I don't.
Okay. Then again, Evelyn, thank you very much. You will forever be the first to present live at NLNOG virtually. And with that, I just got noticed that we're ready for our next presenter. That will be Massimo. And Massimo will present and give an update on BGPalerter with regards to RPKI. Massimo, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much.
First of all, Denise, voor de goede zorgen.
So first of all, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Massimo Candela. I'm a senior software engineer at NTT. What I do there is mostly I work on the automation and monitoring of our network, and the presentation of today is also about monitoring. In particular, I will show you how BGP monitoring can help ease your RPKI deployment. So I'm sure that some of you already heard of this tool called BGPalerter. This is what we will use for the BGP monitoring. This is an open source tool released under BSD3 license. It's available in this GitHub repository here. And we developed it because we needed at least to have hijacks detection and visibility loss and something easy to integrate with our system. And after we added a lot of other features that you can also benefit. And it works in real time. You will get notified if something happens in a matter of seconds, and it's one of our main goals was to make it extremely easy to use. So it does include auto configuration, and you don't need to collect any data. So essentially, it's something that you download and run. And we will see also why that was one of our goals. So the motivation for creating it, I believe it's important to mention them, is because I personally believe, but also all my colleagues, that monitoring BGP is a fundamental activity if you operate on the public internet. And when we talk about BGP monitoring, there is always this thing that comes is like, oh, we are talking about hijack detection, which I personally don't like. BGP monitoring is not only about hijack detection. Hijack detection is a small part of it. A lot of issues today are essentially error, typos, misconfiguration of all kinds, and visibility issues and things like this. So you don't want only to monitor what other players, what other autonomous systems are doing with your prefixes. So if they are hijacking them, but you also want to monitor your autonomous system and have your autonomous system under control, and be able to timely identify if you are announcing something that you were not supposed to, because maybe it's a typo, or if you just deployed a network configuration and you're losing visibility. And the reasons for releasing it open source is because I believe, and we believe, that internet is composed of 1,000 network players, and essentially they have different level of automation expertise, of softwares involved. So having software that they are easy to access and free, and also easy to use, will increase overall the amount of monitoring that is done, and also improve the stability of the global internet. So everybody will benefit from it. So what you can monitor for with BGPalerter. This is just a summary. You can monitor for if your prefixes, you can get notified if your prefixes start losing visibility, if any of your prefixes is hijacked, if you start announcing RPKI invalids or prefixes that they are not covered at all by ROAS. And you can also get notified if your autonomous system starts announcing something that was not visible before, and there was like a new prefix, and this it can be a typo or it can be a normal thing. And also you can specify specific matching rules on the IS path, like for example regular expressions, and get notified every time there is like a path matching such expression. So for example, you can detect, I don't know, scrubbing centers and things like this. So this is the what you would see from we have it as a Slack channel. We use it on a Slack channel. This is just an example. These are fake messages, but this is just to give you an idea. And you can integrate BGPalerter with a lot of things, not only, of course, with Slack. We will see this later. So now, when I usually do this presentation on face-to-face conference, I usually ask if you have your laptop with you, you can just follow a few steps and you will be able to monitor your autonomous system. But I know that you have some sort of device in front in this case, so it would be, don't have to check, it would be easy for you. So there would be basically 2 steps. If you follow them, you will be monitoring your autonomous system, and from that we will proceed on the RPKI monitoring. So the first thing is you go on the GitHub repository. If you downloaded the PDF, which are in the agenda of the NLNOG website, you can click on this URL here. If you didn't, you just go on Google or whatever search engine you like and type BGPalerter entity, and the first result is going to be this repo. So you land in this page and you go in this column here on the right where it says releases, and the latest release is 1.26.0. So you reach when you click there, you reach this page which says all the changes and whatever, but the part that we are really interested in is in this lower part here, where you have the binaries. So we compile the binaries for Linux, Mac OS, and Windows. So what we will do in this quick tutorial is to just download that and run it essentially there. But you can do other things. You can, for example, clone the repository and run the source code. So just run the source code natively, or you can clone the repository and after compile it, so create a binary yourself. Or if you like Docker, on Docker Hub, there is also BGPalerter, and there is also documentation in the Git repo on how to use it in Docker. So now we will use the binary. So I essentially have a script that I usually use to install or update BGPalerter, which is this one, which is super easy. I use this URL provided by GitHub, that instead of providing the version, I use latest, and the latest points always to the stable one, so not the pre-releases. So you do wget, you download it, you make executable, you run it. That's all. You're ready. The setup is essentially done. So the first time you run it, BGPalerter will say, okay, I don't find any configuration yet, so what should I monitor? So it's going to ask you, 4 questions. The first of which is, would you like to proceed with the auto configuration? So you say yes, and you go to the second question that says, which autonomous system you want to monitor. You can also provide more than one autonomous system, comma separated. And you can also, we will see later briefly, you can create user groups. So they basically, you can just monitor all the autonomous system or the prefixes that you want, and basically send the alerts to different user groups if you decide. The other question is, would you like to, so if there are any other, essentially other autonomous systems that are announcing part of your address space, if that is true, you answer to this question yes. If you don't know, answer yes, in case BGPalerter will compute it anyway, and you can revise it. And the last question is asking you if you want to be notified if your autonomous system starts announcing a new prefix that was not visible before. And I would always answer yes to this question, because as I said, this could be identification of you did a typo or some error, or if you are really announcing a new prefix, which is normal, the notification will let you know that your BGPalerter configuration is not anymore up to date with the reality of your network, so you may want to update it. So basically, there is no real reason to say no to this question. BGPalerter will start crunching some stuff, detecting all your prefixes and whatever, creating all the configuration, which is basically in 2 files. One is config.yaml, the other is prefixes.yaml, which they have the configuration and the prefixes to monitor. And you will see this message that says monitoring blah, blah, blah. When you see that, it means that BGPalerter is already up and running, monitoring your resources. It means that is getting data, is processing such data. So BGPalerter doesn't require, in particular, RPKI, which is also an amazing project. So they are, and the monitoring is done in the application itself. So there is no entity server involved in the monitor whatsoever. So you download the application and you get the data from RPKI, and the process is done on where you install the application. So if you kill this process now and you run it again, it will just say monitoring blah, 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 because the configuration is already saved. So the first time only it's gonna ask you questions. If you get a warning about like some of your prefixes are not covered by ROAS, that is okay, it will work anyway. But you may want to review that by hand, the prefixes.yaml, because essentially what BGPalerter does is goes online, checks whatever your autonomous system is announcing, cross-validates that set of prefixes with ROAS. And if this second step is not possible because you don't have ROAS, basically he's going to enforce whatever you are announcing when you run the auto configuration. So if in that moment you are announcing something that you were not supposed to announce, you basically are enforcing that status in the monitoring. So in that case, if you're not sure if your network configuration in that moment is correct, you may want to review it by hand. It's also a good way to have a summary. So now the question, since it's monitoring, where do you get the alerts? By default, you go in this directory logs and you find file with reports, blah, 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 with a date, and you will find a sort of report like these prefixes, I jacked these prefixes, lost visibility from X peers, and blah, blah, blah. But this is, I would say, suboptimal. You may want to actually send these alerts to a more real-time approach, something like email, Slack, have a dashboard for it like Alerta, Kafka, Sysglow, WebEx, Mattermost, Telegram, Pushover, or any HTTP endpoint. So you can basically create your own API and BGPalerter will send post requests. These are all supported by default. And also, we really care about making the process really not noisy, and the alerts are automatically bundled and throttled. I will come back to this point later. As I said, you can define groups that they get specific alerts to specific groups or specific type of alert to specific platform, like some on Slack, some by email. You can decide. It's really flexible. And it's important to remember BGPalerter doesn't only send the alerts, but also sends, stores the BGP messages, the BGP updates that trigger such alerts. So in case you want to go and do troubleshooting and understand better what happened. So this is an example of report by email. This is the one we saw on Slack. This is the Alerta dashboard, which is a dashboard that is open source, extremely easy to install. You basically install this, and after you say to BGPalerter which host and port this dashboard is receiving data, and that's all. So now coming back to the noisy part. So BGPalerter, the default configuration today is extremely silent, at least for my experience. So if you have a case where BGPalerter is noisy, mostly is because of the cases that I reviewed are because at the beginning, such configuration was not optimized like it is today. You learn on the way. So what you should do is probably to update both BGPalerter and reapply the default configuration that you can find here, and maybe add the changes that you added. But in particular, check this threshold min peers and check if you set something reasonable. Check threshold min peer says, don't send an alert if this issue is not visible from at least X peers. I would say at least 2 is a good threshold, because you don't want to see small things happening between 2 autonomous systems. And also, if you have prefixes that you use for all sorts of experiments, you can exclude those. So now we go in configs.yaml that was generated automatically by BGPalerter. So your application is already monitoring and whatever. We just see that there is this part connector where you check where the data is coming from, in this case RIS, and there is this part of the monitors. We will focus now on the monitors. Each of them is a plug and play monitor that you can remove by commenting it out, or you can add others, you can implement yours, you can do whatever you want. And so for example, you have hijack, new prefix, path, visibility, blah, blah, blah. And the last one is monitor RPKI. We will come back to this one in a bit. So we'll keep scrolling, and here is the section with the reports. By default, only this one is enabled to write on file. But if you go here, you can have report email and all sorts of reports. You basically remove it from the comment, and you change some configuration like host port, username, password, or whatever. In case of the luck, you put like the URL of your webhook, or if you have an HTTP API, you put your HTTP endpoint. That's all. Now, a really important part is this process monitor. So when you use BGPalerter in production, you need to monitor the BGPalerter process. You need to basically be aware that you have to know if when BGPalerter is silent, if it is because nothing is happening or because it's not working at all. So for example, connectivity is not working on that, the VM went down or things like this. You need to monitor the monitoring process. To do that, basically there are some options here. One is called Uptime API, which essentially creates an API that you can query periodically, and BGPalerter will answer what's the status, or the opposite way. So provide a URL, and BGPalerter periodically will query that URL in a sort of heartbeat fashion. I usually use the first one, so I removed it from the comment. I port by default is 8011. You can put whatever you want. And if you go on the browser and you go on localhost 8011 status, you restart the process, you will see that you have this JSON now, this API that says warning false. You can monitor that warning false. There is a summary. If warning is true, here it will tell you where the issue is. Maybe a connector is disconnected, maybe the data source is down or whatever. It's really stable usually, but you need to monitor it anyway. If you don't want to read the payload, for example, you want to configure it in Nagios, you can read the payload, or you can also just listen, read the HTTP status code. And if it's 200, it's fine. If it's different than 200, you have an issue. So now let's focus on the RPKI deployment and the support. So what we want to do is to have BGPalerter to timely notify us if we are announcing RPKI invalids or prefixes not covered by ROAS, both at the entire SNever or for specific prefixes. And we want to have alerts like this, where we say what the issue is and also which ROAS cover such prefix. So this is particularly useful before you deploy RPKI, during RPKI deployment, and after you deploy RPKI. The reason is before you deploy RPKI, you can use this to basically test how life with RPKI will be. And we will see what that means. During RPKI deployment, you can use it to getting notified if you are announcing something invalid, and after RPKI deploying, also to getting notified not only if you're announcing something invalid, but also to check if everything that you're announcing is covered by ROA and if your network configuration is aligned with the ROAs that you define. So we go back in this configuration here, and we go back in this monitor RPKI, and there is the, let's check two parameters. This check uncover, that is by default is set to false. It means, do you want me to notify you for prefixes that are not covered by ROA? So if you set it to false, it means no, only notify me for RPKI invalid. The other important parameter is this highlighted here. There is VRP provider, which is entity. So what's a VRP provider? VRP provider is essentially somebody that does the RPKI validation and generates a file with a list of prefixes, autonomous system that should originate that prefix and a prefix length. So there are at the moment two providers that they, or at least two that I'm aware of, which BGPalerter supports both, which is one is entity, the other one is RIPE NCC. And you can put, if you want RIPE, you can put RIPE. If you want entity, you put entity. So this is clean, easy in a way that you download the process and it just runs and you don't have to do anything by yourself, but it's not probably the best way to go. You are using this to monitor, so you are not using this VRP file to enforce your network policies, but still you're basically monitor with the RPK validation done by somebody else, which I said it's easy, but not the optimal solution. Because essentially you are trusting somebody else to do that. So what you should do, what you could do is to essentially generate those VRP file yourself periodically and point BGPalerter to read that file instead of to use a provider. And what I strongly suggest is to use this RPKI client, which is open source also. It's available in these two links. It's basically available for FreeBSD and all major Linux distribution. And one of the developers is Snijders. And you have this, another thing that you will need is this JQ tool. I like to give instruction that they are really copy and paste, because I like to, when I do stuff, also to see those when I want to test stuff or fly. So this JQ also, you can install it with apt-get, brew is everywhere. And here is the copy and paste line. So what you do is RPKI client -J to get the JSON output, because we need that, and you set which directory you want, like test in this case. And after you do cut, you pipe it inside this JQ to do a small manipulation, and you write your test VRP JSON, which is in the format supported by BGPalerter. Possibly in the future, I will make it polymorphic and accepting various formats by default, but for now, this is the small thing that you have to do. Anyway, it's like one line, you put it in cron tab every 15 minutes. And you are good to go. So here you removed, instead of VRP provider, you replace it with VRP file, and you put which file it is. BGPalerter starts a watch on that file, and every time you change it, it will reload the VRP definition. So now we said that you can use BGPalerter to test how it would be to have RPKI in your network. So it's clear, it's easy now to see how that can be done. So let's go directly to see how that VRP file is done. So it is essentially a list of these JSON blocks. Each of them has SN prefix max length, and it's just a JSON file. That's probably also why you should generate it yourself. So you can, if you want, you can just write whatever you want in this, and you are faking RAWs in that way. So you are saying to BGPalerter, use these as RAWs. And what you could do is to write here what you are planning to sign as RAW without signing it yet, and leave it running the monitoring for some time, maybe a month. So that BGPalerter will let you know if you at some point start announcing something that contradicts such RAWs. But in particular, it's extremely useful to check if your organization is able to stick to the signed RAWs, to kind of develop a policy to coordinate. So it is a really common case that you sign the RAWs and after you forget about it and you start announcing something that is more specific and has a prefix length different than what you allow in the ROAS, and so basically that is a RPKI invalid. Or that and that sometimes it can be done because you need it, because maybe you are under hijack or whatever, you need to do that. Or other cases are like if you start announcing something and you forget to sign the ROAS. So you leave it running for a bit and you kind of also see how it works and if you need to develop some coordination with your inside your organization. So that's all for my presentation. I would like to remind you that the code is open. This is the GitHub repository. You can go there, you can contribute, you can like it, you can do whatever you want there. I created recently a page that it's just 2 days ago, where essentially if you're using BGPalerter and you would like to just say that, you just can put your company names there, just to make me happy. There is no other. And that's all. So this is the repository. And if you have questions, that is the moment. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Massimo. Really interesting. And yes, there are a few questions. We're a little bit short on time, so you might want to tell folks as well how they can reach you in case they have follow-up questions. But the first question we received is, would it be possible to offer some kind of BGPalerter as an online service to the public?
You would be. It was actually, it would not be particularly difficult to do. I mean, for now, we didn't focus on that. We may think about it, but yeah, it definitely would be not difficult to do. But anyway, it's what I would say is extremely easy to use. So I would try first to do it like this, but it could be an option.
Okay, second question. What is the big difference between your tool and the RIPE RPKI alerts you can get from, or the RPKI alerts you can get from RIPE?
Well, first of all, this is, let's say, a tool that does all kind of monitoring at once, and you may find useful or not to have also the RPKI together. And also it is has various type of integration. So it is mostly this, and it is also, you can use it across all RIRs independently of where you sign your ROAS. Okay. That is at least my answer.
Yeah, so we also received a suggestion as with regards to the field where you enter the autonomous system you want to monitor. Would it be possible to specify an AS macro by name?
So to specify the AS, no, for now, no, you have to specify AS numbers. There is no other option. But I mean, I didn't get it, but from the name, it's you go on RIPE-stat, it's easy to get which autonomous system is. Maybe I didn't get the question, sorry.
Well, I think the question is related to having the option to, indeed, via entering an AS macro, being able to enter a number of ASs in one go, right? Instead of entering them one by one.
Oh, I got it. So basically like match all Google thing, and no, there is no such option. Honestly, I tried in the past for another project to do that. It's if there are some complications on that, because sometimes some operators, they associate names of IS they used to peer like with somebody, and it can be not correct, but it could be a feature request. We could add it.
Okay. Last question for now. Have you published this tool in an academic journal or conference? Because the asker of the question is curious about which algorithm and techniques has been used.
So no, they are not published because I don't think at the moment there is, maybe it could be done, but I don't think at the moment there is so much, let's say, science behind it. The code is open source. There are also other solutions available that they mostly focus on hijack. So the easy answer is not published, but if somebody wants, the algorithms involved are not particularly difficult, and they are open.
Okay, thank you. And with that, thank you very much, Massimo, for this really interesting presentation. With that, we've come to the end of the first part of NLNOG Live. So we'll take a short coffee break. We're running 5 minutes out of the schedule, so I would suggest to be back at 3:20. That is in UTC +2. So we'll see each other back in 15 minutes. Enjoy your coffee. Welcome back after the coffee break. I hope you all had time to get a refresh and that you're ready for part 2 of NLNOG Live. We have another 2 presentations coming up. The first one is about how to prepare your budget for next year. We will have brothers Jochem and Steven de Ruig. And after that, we will have a presentation from our own Niels Raijer and Snijders on out-of-band management. In the meantime, we got a few questions with regards to the music. We're working on getting the title and information for those who are interested in getting it. If you have any questions with regards to the presentations, it might be that we don't have enough time to go through all the questions, but all the presenters promised me that they are very willing to answer your questions offline as well. So please do reach out to the presenters directly. And with that, I would like to give the floor to Jochem and Steven.
Thank you, Melchior. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Jochem, and I'm here with my brother Steven, who's in a different location, so I hope he's present. Steven, are you there? Oh. Well, not yet. He's actually currently on vacation, so maybe his connectivity is a bit less. Well, we're here to hopefully prepare you a bit for your budget next year. I really hope this presentation helps you a bit. It's a bit generic, but budgeting is quite a specific field, and there's a lot of different ways on how to do it. What we want to do today is we first introduce ourselves a bit and our background, and we'll go a bit into the basic corporate finance concepts, mainly the 3 concepts. The profit loss, balance sheet, and the cash flow. Where to put what? OPEX versus CAPEX, operational expenses versus capital expenses, which is always a key point for financial people, that you differentiate between the 2. I'll explain a bit why that's so relevant and what happens to these 2 different items. The planning and control cycle, which will explain a bit for you where the budget sits and why, how finance operates and how it runs through a financial year. Then hopefully I can tell you a bit about the preparation for your budget. Hopefully that's helpful. And we'll close with a business case and some closing remarks. Steven, I hope you're there. I can't hear you, unfortunately.
No, can't you still hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay, good. Hi, I'm Steven de Ruig. I'm the brother of. I've been working, started working at Pink Elephant, a really old startup in the technology sector about 40 years ago, I guess, and worked my way through KPN in the end. And then I joined the spin-off of G-Tronics. So G-Tronics was bought by investors, and now we are, the international part is still alive and kicking. And I'm doing the sales pricing architects, but at G-Tronics I was responsible for the data center costing and CAPEX procedure, processes, business cases and stuff. So it's quite a lot of experience in that. Over to you, Jochem.
Yeah, and my name is Jochem, and actually Steven has a lot more experience in the cost calculation and budgeting field. I've been CFO of a RIPE NCC, which was quite a broad role. I know quite a few of you from that time. Currently, I'm working as CFO of Freedom Internet, which is a startup, and it's quite exciting. We're setting up a new ISP in the Netherlands, and hopefully some of you will join us this year or the next year, who knows. Well, why do we do this presentation together? I think I feel the experience Stephen has and I have is quite complementary. He has a very specific experience in a lot of cost calculation, pricing, and that area, which I think really is quite interesting to you and can help you in your budgeting. And I have a more general overview in how other departments also look at budgeting and how the budgeting process works in companies. Well, to kick it off, we want to say that actually finance is not an exact science. It's not a 0 or a 1. What we try to do is to reflect the performance of the company in financial figures. And really, there is so many different laws, legislations, ways in how to do that. Maybe you've heard some of these, the Dutch GAAP, the US GAAP, IFRS. These are different reporting standards. And also, a lot of companies always have different fiscal rules, commercial rules. Of course, it matters who you present these figures to. Internally, there can be a lot more detail into the figures and maybe a lot more information is supplied than actually externally is done. A budget is most of the times a lot of an internal process and internally to check how the company is doing. Well, then what is an asset, whether it's operational expense or capital expense? There's a huge variety in this as well, and it also depends on the line of business of the company. For instance, software development could be a capital expense or operational expense, depending on how a company views this and how they want to use this in the future. Then there's, of course, intercompany items, and I think which has been quite unique, but also in English notation, we use dots where in Dutch notation it's a comma and the other way around, which is quite confusing, but I think the European mainland has a different comma and dot than the Anglo-Saxon world. So what we want to give you is that every company, every country, every financial person has a bit of a different view, and you got to try and understand a bit how your company looks at financials. So there's a lot of interpretation, but one thing, and it's kind of come back a bit in this presentation every now and then, cash is king. So if you can show your financial that it's a cash generating venture, they always become happy. There's always financial company specific, I call them trades. So every company has a different way in looking at it, as mentioned before. So even the company registration and structure will determine on the rules it has to adhere to. I used to work at the RPKI, which is an association on the Dutch law. It has very different rules than when you're a limited company in the Netherlands, and what you have to publish and what you don't have to publish. Also, there are some choices that are made in financing and bookkeeping. What figures do we find relevant? What KPIs do we want to use? Then you have the size of the company, which can really matter. Like now I work at a startup company. We are very much focused on cash management and cash flow, while a large corporation probably focuses a lot more on their margin and how to optimize that. So again, try to understand your company's specific setup, the focus points that your finance department and the management has. Then basic corporate finance, we're just going to run a bit through some of these items. Well, first, the very basic concept, debit, credit, the balance, the profit and loss, and the cash flow. We'll cover all three. Debit, credit, well, you probably all know this. A transaction creates a booking, a journal entry, and a booking always has two sides, a debit and a credit side, which equates to left and right in many ways. Debtors for a company are third parties that pay to the company. Creditors for a company are third parties you have to pay. I'll run a bit quicker through these slides because they're not the most juicy, but I think they're relevant background information. Looking at the balance, which apologies, I wrote in Dutch. You have the asset side on the left, and in the Dutch way, the fixed assets are on the top and the other assets are at the bottom. In English notation, you use it a lot of times the other way around. On the right-hand side is the liabilities, where your equity is, and your debt, long-term and short-term. So just to understand where your capital expenditure will go in here. The profit and loss, we've tried to summarize quite in a short fashion. Of course, you've got revenue, then you got the cost of the revenue, and you get to a gross margin. Then you have many different items which can be a bit company specific, but there's always going to be personnel, direct personnel that is related to the revenue stream, the business unit or the product, but also indirect, which could be staff or other indirect cost related to personnel. Then, of course, you have your suppliers cost like consultancy, maintenance, etc. And other costs like IT, overhead. This then, if you deduct these from the gross margin, will come to what we call in finance the EBITDA, which is an acronym which is very often used, and it stands for earnings before income, taxes, depreciation, amortization. So this is actually how much you earn before all kind of other items are deducted, like taxes and the depreciation of your capital expenditure. When you actually take the capital expenditure away from that, you end up with the EBIT, and that's also a figure that's quite frequently looked at. When you deduct the financial costs and taxes, you come to a net result. This is not cast in stone. A lot of companies have different ways, different items they add to coming to a net result. But this is roughly how it looks. Cash flow.
Yeah.
Yeah.
If I may add, what you often see is that the depreciation is added to the cost, so you get the EBIT immediately. For instance, when at Pink Ricada we used to have it. We used to be the EBIT was the most important, and only later on, especially in the KPN business, the look for the EBITDA became more. So it all depends on how the board is managing the company, and therefore you should ask your board or your owners how they will manage the company. Why people look at the earnings before income, taxes, depreciation, and amortization is that you cannot do anything about it. So the other costs, the personal costs, supplier costs, that's the one you can influence, and depreciation and amortization are long-time fixed costs running, and so that's what I would like to add. Jochem, over to you.
Yeah, thank you. The cash flow is, I think, the third financial overview that is common and quite a key integral part of financial reporting. So just to be clear, a balance sheet is kind of a photograph. At one moment, you look at how the company is looking. The profit and loss is over a period of time, whether it's a month, a quarter, or a year. That depends. And the cash position as well is like a video. It's over a period of time. So what you look at, for instance, you take the cash position at the beginning of the year, you look at the inflow, you look at the outflow, but you actually look at the cash going out. So whether it's CAPEX or OPEX, that's not that important. And taxes also flow through this cash overview. I think maybe a good analogy is you can just see it as, let's say a company has one bank account and it has one bank balance. the cash flow will show you then how the bank balance is doing. Then I think quite something where a lot of mix-up happens and difference of opinion is the operational expense versus the capital expenses. As mentioned before, a lot of companies have different ways in how they look at it, and it can deviate from company to company on what they take as capital expense and what as operational expense. But as a rule of thumb, operational expenses are recurring expenses like service fees, monthly fees, one-off smaller items. You could say as a rule of thumb, when it's below 500 euros, it's going to be an operational expense. So operational expenses are directly taken in the profit and loss. So you don't see these on the balance sheet. Then on the other side, we have the capital expenses, which are larger purchases, investments, but it also could be intangible items like software development, for instance. When you've had a new software tool built, then this could be taken as an asset on your balance sheet. So that's where you find the capital expense on the balance sheet. An asset has a lifespan, a commercial and a fiscal lifespan. There's different terms for that. And it's depreciated over time. And depreciation then goes into the profit and loss. And this is what Stephen mentioned, that this is kind of a fixed cost. So when it's on your balance sheet, it's going to give a recurring cost over time. So why is this difference so relevant? Well, it impacts the profit and loss in a year differently. OPEX has a larger impact, CAPEX smaller on a given year. So OPEX more variable component, while CAPEX is a more fixed component. CAPEX a lot of times is part of a strategic long-term or an investment business case that runs over several years. And I think for financial people, why CAPEX is always a bit different is that there's different financing possibilities, which could optimize your cash flow. Financial operational needs are a couple of those. Then the planning and control cycle. Stephen, I think you know a bit more about this, so maybe you could talk through this.
Yes, well, the planning and control cycle is usually what happens. So at the end of the summer, when you start planning what you will do next year, a director once said it's really easy. You just tell them what you want to be later in your life, but it's not that easy. It's there's lots of fields. So the first field will be that you there's the long-term outlook you will have. What will be your products and stuff, and then you break it down into smaller components, and you work downwards until you get an outlook, basically per quarter, sometimes per year. It's the whole point about this is that when you have made a decent planning, you can see it's easier for the finance department to see whether you are deviating from it, and it's especially in this big data time. Sometimes the systems can find deviations much sooner, much earlier than you would find them yourselves, and then so that's important. Could we go to the next slide? So how does it work? So first you do the planning, and then you start executing. So in the beginning of the year, you're running your plans, and then every month the finance department will tell you how much you deviate from it. That's the monitor part. An important time that is that you then have to do the review. And the review, you have to be really careful on if things are really going as according to plan, or maybe it looks only looks that way, and then some costs are way off, and some costs for the good, and some costs are way off for the bad. So that's one of the things you really have to be careful about. And from my experience in IT, it often happens that especially maintenance costs can be quite different from planning. And this also accounts for a quickly growing product. And we all hope we have a product which will double or triple in a year, and then you have to be really careful that the cost parts remain in control, and you don't have a much more expensive product when it has grown, because then you run out of control. Next slide, yes. So Jochem, this is probably one which is more your part.
Yeah, I think this is just a bit more even tactical way of looking at it. So you do your resource planning, then you make a cost estimation. From that, you build your budget, and then afterwards you control the cost. I think it just visualizes a bit what Stephen just mentioned. And I think why we're telling this, that you actually, engineers and operational departments provide a key part of the planning and control cycle, mainly in the planning, of course, where you can actually help build a good solid budget, but also in the cost control, which you all take your part in. So now a bit into how to prepare your budget and why budgeting. Well, as mentioned, we see this as part of the planning and control cycle, which is a bit the heartbeat of financial departments nowadays. It's really the financial planning for the business to give a financial insight into the future. And of course, you look back into the current affairs, and from that, try to project onwards. A lot of times it's, of course, an internal process, but the figures are mostly used internally. It's very infrequent that companies detailed show what they budgeted for towards the outside world. It's a lot of times an internal thing. The estimates they have, they'll present it to their board, and the board will approve it. It also sets the financial framework for the planning and how the year is gonna look. So we tried here to give you a bit of a tool on what is a way to approach your budget. Well, first work out your plans. I think you probably already done that, but anyway, start with that. Then consider all the details of the plan. A lot of times I hear people, this is my idea, this is what I want. And then a financial starts asking all these questions like, so how many servers, what connections, blah, blah, blah. But the more detail you have, the better budget you can build. It really helps financial people as well, but also for yourself if you have a detailed budget, and then from that you can build a solid budget for the year. Well, this is a bit an open door, as we say in Dutch, but we do want to mention it. Don't underestimate. I mean, it sounds like great. This person has a really tight budget this year. That's fantastic. But if that could mean you can't execute your plans, or when you try to execute your plans all the time, your budget is too constrained, and you have to go to your management to get approval. So I really think underestimating is not the way to go. But overestimating is also not a very wise way forward, because a lot of times you see big budgets coming in as a financial, and then right away, okay, this deviates too much from the previous year. This will impact the business case too much, and then there's a long road ahead of you and your financial person to get to a budget which is a bit more realistic. So I think it really helps if you have a realistic budget. When you put a server and the price, put that price in, don't mark it up with a certain amount. That's just going to lead to a lot of extra discussion with your finance department. So what helps in working together with your finance department is prepare a detailed, well thought out budget. Think a bit further than 1 year. A lot of business cases, projects have a longer lifespan. Also, if you implement, let's say you build a whole extra network or a couple of extra racks, that will also have an impact for the future years. So think about that, and also think about the reasoning. I think a lot of times in financial people, they don't always know the business that detailed and that well. It really helps them if you explain them in why you want a budget and for what amount. So just to give a silly example, so we're building this new piece of software to support patching our servers. Saves us an hour per month in maintenance so that we can quicker resolve customer issues and have an increase in customer service. This way, a finance person can then explain as well when this budget item comes up to his management and to the controller or CFO why that item is budgeted. Well, then, of course, your finance department... Sorry, Steve.
Yeah. Well, one of the important things is that we often like to have the scenario. So that there's the bad case scenario and the best case scenario, and the worst scenario is especially important, so that what happens when your product is not successful, whether you make a loss or you're just break even. And the best case scenario is important because when it triples or tenfolds the amount, that you still have the cost under control. And well, as I mentioned earlier, that's especially important. In my time, KPN had this new product, Digitenne television, and they had envisioned that they might have 30,000 people using it. And then in no time, there were 300,000 and then even more. And the cost of increasing their capacity was enormous, much more than anticipated and much more than the original costs. So it became a loss. Of course, they created a new product and then everything went fine. But you have to be careful about the best case as well, that you keep your products costs in order. Over to you, Jochem.
Thank you. Well, I think a finance department should assist you. I don't know if it always happens, but they should, of course, give you clear guidelines on the process, the timelines, and the templates. And most of you will probably get an Excel spreadsheet, which you have to fill out. But anyway, I think they should really help and assist you. And also, as I mentioned before, in the operational and capital expenses, they should very clearly know what in the company is operational expense and is a capital expense. Also, I think it's good if they give you a bit of an indication on the direction of the budget. A lot of times, of course, we think in a growth scenario, but I think that will give you a bit of footing on where to go with your budget. And then there could be other considerations, like as we sometimes call them, finance a contingency or an unforeseen budget. Sometimes this is possible, and it could be quite useful if you have a bit of a gray area which you can actually use. in the next year or years. So how do we work on a budget? Well, in most cases, you start with an overall picture and you look at the growth in sales and the increase in cost. Somehow we always aim for a lower increase in cost and a higher increase in sales. The sales estimates, a lot of times the finance department is quite critical at it to increase them a bit. This also is a view of management a lot of times, that sales tries to lower this a bit while the finance department then wants to up it. And the cost estimates go the other way around. I think what's always a bit a conflict is the top-down and bottom-up approach. A lot of companies pretend to be bottom-up, build a bottom-up budget, while then top-down an X% is cut from the cost budget and the sales budget is increased by X%. So this is always a bit a gray area, whether it's top-down or bottom-up, but it's good to understand this a bit, and every company has a different approach on how to do this and how to finalize. So now to wrap it up, we want to provide a short business case just to get your brain a bit thinking about what you could do with your budget. There's a lot of different areas and things you have to consider when looking at your business case. Of course, there's cost and revenue, which I think you will look at. But there's a lot of detail to look at: the completeness, the relevance. There's of course also risk involved in any business case, and as a financial, you try to actually make that material on how the risk impacts the financial business case. Margin, does the margin meet the internal goals set? It's quite an important KPI for a lot of companies, whether a business case has a solid margin. Cash flow, you see that more and more now, and a positive cash flow is very important, but also there's indicators like net present value and weighted average cost per capital, NPV and WACC. Beautiful acronyms, which are used actually to determine whether a business case is a valid case for that company. And all in all, there's also the process control when a business case is pushed forward. So what we did in the case, and actually my brother built this case several years back, but I think it's very accurate still. What if you have 600,000 euros available to invest? The sales comes up with 3 different opportunities, 3 different cases with different lifespans, a 3, 4, and 5 year lifespan. The total cost for these 3 opportunities are the same. The annual cost of the maintenance personnel, etc., is a percentage of this investment value. To show you how that total cost looks then is, so we have that investment of 600,000, then the maintenance personnel is 50%, other costs 30, indirect costs 27.5. All in all, total project costs a bit over 1.5 million. Okay, this is a lot of information on one slide. I won't go endlessly in detail. What I want to mention is in case A, the 3-year case, what you see, of course, is that the costs are a bit higher in those 3 years, while in the other case you see them being lower. So the total project costs are higher. The total income is also a bit higher, estimated. The profit per year comes out to 85,000, profit margin 14%. I think our main message is already that you can see 3 different cases. Depending on what you look at, you might select a different case. If you look at increasing your sales, you'll take case A. If you look at the profit amount per year, you'll take case B. Or if you look at the margin, you'll take case C. To zoom a bit more into detail on how a finance looks at a business case, there's this concept that money loses its value over time, and that's a cash flow net present value concept, so that you recalculate future cash flows into current day value with a discount figure. Of course, there's also the payback time, the time it takes to recoup the initial investment. And if we show these two into the analysis of the three cases, we can actually see that the net present value for the second case is the highest out of the three, but the payback period, so the time it takes to recoup the initial investment, is in case A the fastest with 2.5 years. You can see, depending on what you look at, you'll select a different case. The orange being the most negative and the green being the most positive for a given parameter. So what we want you to take from this is that focus on different financial parameters will lead to a different choice. In different companies, a different case will prevail. So it's very valuable to understand the company focus, whether it's on cash, on net present value, on revenue, or on another indicator. So the conclusions we would like you to take from this, make sure you have a good differentiation between your operational and capital expenditure. Think longer term in your budget. And maybe the most important, engage and communicate with your finance department on the budget. They should support you, they should help you, and together you can build the right, realistic budget. And the last thing is, of course, the love for MS Excel in finance. I think it's the tool of choice, but yeah, it's what we use, and it does the trick for most finance departments. Stephen, any last conclusion you want to give everyone?
I do agree totally, and also think in scenarios. So be careful if you do the budgeting. Make sure you know what happens if the volumes stay low, and what happens if they run amok, and because that's also really important. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jochem and Steven. This was really interesting to sort of get a deep dive in 20-25 minutes into the world of finance. I learned a lot from it. And you also unraveled a really interesting discussion on IRC, on our IRC channel, with regards to if IT is a cost or an asset. In other words, maybe that's a suggestion to you as finance folks, where the some parts of IT are actually a cost, but the knowledge people have could be an asset. So that would be maybe interesting for your reporting. Just a suggestion to keep the engineers happy. There was also a question. What is your opinion on the current popular use of equity IRR, internal rate of return, as a measure of value?
Steve, I think you have quite some experience with the IRR.
Yeah, well, IRR is the net present value, which is 0, of course, and at KPN, which is capital intensive, IRR was the really important. But then we always looked at the net present value to compare business cases, because often there were multiple groups of engineers trying to create a solution, and then the business cases were compared based on the net present value. And IRR is for me, is simply it tells you when it's 0, so it gives you a percentage. So it's the same. And yes, it's for a business case, especially when there's capex in it, it's the most important parameter there is.
All right. Big thank you, Jochem and Steven, for this really interesting deep dive. Next up are Niels Raijer and Snijders. First, Niels will start, and both will present their solution they've implemented or using in their network for out-of-band network management. So Niels, if you're ready, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Melchior. Yeah, like the finance talk that we heard just now, the out-of-band management talk was something that came up in the NLNOG coffee break. And I figured it was a nice subject to talk about, actually, because an out-of-band network can be a little bit more complicated than you think. And I think most people will know me. Just to be sure, I am the CTO of Fusix Networks. And then later on, Job will present about the NTT out-of-band network. And we will have a small discussion about both our setups and the pitfalls of each other's networks. Hopefully, this will help you get your out-of-band network in a better shape than it might possibly be right now. And as a result, we hope to make the internet become better manageable. What we do as Fusix is we operate 2-star networks here in the Netherlands. We did have a US operation, but we stopped with that earlier this year. We automate a lot, so we have a very small staff, and we pride ourselves that we have lovely clients. But all the automation means that we have a big reliance on a lot of metadata, because our customer portal uses lots of information that comes from the network. And in addition, the network is provisioned through the automation platform. So we also need a secure and reliable way for the software that we have to talk to the network. So when you think about out-of-band networks, that's just to connect to your equipment in case there is a problem, right? That must be it. Well, think again, because what happens if it isn't anymore? When I started to look at what we are actually doing across the out-of-band network, I came to this list: SNMP, S-Flow or NetFlow feeds that we are running through it for DDoS detection and for making it easy for our customers to see what kind of traffic they are doing through the portal. We monitor BGP sessions, that we have software logging into the routers to check on the status of the BGP messages so we can alert our customers if a session goes down. Of course, the whole network is configured through the out-of-band network. We have VPN access to get into the out-of-band network in case you need to configure something manually, which I don't advise anymore, but it does happen. And obviously, once you are on that out-of-band network, we have an internal DNS view, so we can just type core router 0 NICF, and then bam, I'm logged into the thing whenever I'm connected to the VPN. And then, of course, yeah, in the end, finally, there is still the emergency CLI access via SSH or the console port, which is something that we also handle through the out-of-band network. So yeah, we do have that. But when I started to realize how much we are actually doing through this out-of-band network, yeah, it became clear that we had to improve this and make sure that it gets better and better all the time. Because what do you usually do when you want to put up an out-of-band network somewhere in a data center? Well, you call your nicest competitor, or you look at who is your direct neighbor in the data center and you ask, can I have a 100 meg port with 10 meg commitment? And then you pay through the nose for the cross connects to go to that port. So that doesn't really scale. We are in almost 30 data centers right now. And if I have to pay €100 a month for each cross connect just for out of band, that is a very significant expense. I'm sure that will be one that Jochem and Steven will not approve. Then there is the other way, putting a 4G router somewhere in each rack, in each data center. Well, have you ever tried to use 4G in a data center? I can tell you, in some places, it does work. But then still, you will have to get 30 4G routers with 30 SIM cards and hope that your IP address will not change, or you need to configure it to get back to some kind of management server or something. But I don't like 4G either. Okay, you say, then we just order a DSL line from Freedom Internet, for instance. I don't know. But have you ever tried to get a DSL line in a data center? There is this ISRA punt that the whole thing needs to be connected to, and you have already noticed with how much hatred I say the words ISRA-punt, because this is one of the most difficult parts of a whole data center. It is almost impossible to get a DSL line to run in a data center, I think. But okay, your mileage may vary, I don't know, but for us, this wasn't a scalable solution. So what we did, we built an in-band, out-of-band network. We have basically two approaches. Some of our data centers, we have a simple dark fiber that goes back to our core sites. And it is very easy because we already use WDM. And we just take the 1 gig optics that we bought in 2014 when we still had a 1 gig network. And we use that in a color dedicated to the out-of-band, and that's wonderful. There are also locations where we lease a wave if the dark fiber isn't really affordable enough compared to the number of customers in that site. And then we will configure one VLAN across that wave to be specifically for the out-of-band network. So I hear you guys thinking, how does he do an in-band, out-of-band network? How did this guy ever get his networking degree? Well, to be sure, I don't have a networking degree. I am a chemical engineer, so you can trust me. But the trick is that we do this via BGP because we always have 2 dark fibers or 2 waves going to each data center. So in every data center where we have a POP, we put a Juniper SRX as the out-of-band router. We put it in a private AS and then use BGP because, of course, if you are a network engineer, then BGP is your tool. If all you have is BGP, then you use BGP. The out-of-band router in each data center has its own /24 of private legacy IP space, IPv4, to both core routers, and it's announced over BGP. And all the management ports of the switches, the Ethernet ports of the air console servers, and any power bars, if we have them, all connect to that out-of-band router. So yeah, well, in the end, this is all one big network, and obviously you understand completely how this works. We have a nice routing table on those SRX core out-of-band routers with ASs and AS paths and all the out-of-band /24s in it. And the setup is totally redundant because we always have at least 2 dark fibers or 2 waves going to each location. As a bonus, we get woken up if there is something wrong with the fiber or with a wave going to a location, because then the BGP session across the out-of-band network will drop. So we have a very crude fiber cut detection system here as well. Now, how do we get onto this out-of-band network? I think this is one of the easiest parts. We have one VPN server running OpenVPN in our own network, and there are 2 friendly competitors' networks that we also have such a machine in, and they also connect back to the out-of-band network. So this is how we get onto the network. Our office location, where I am right now, is also connected to the network basically as if it was a data center too. So our office IP address space here is also reachable directly from this out-of-band network if you are connected to a wire, not to the guest Wi-Fi, strangely enough. Sorry, guys. In the out-of-band network, well, we have a fair number of servers that are clustered, and they have this internal DNS view. Of course, we have LibreNMS running to provide dashboards for ourselves and also for customers. I may need to look into building something nicer there, but who knows, one day. And obviously, all the software tools that we use for configuration changes, flow tools for DDoS detection, everything is running on VM clusters that are connected to this out-of-band network. And all with the idea in mind every time, does it have to be reachable through the public internet? If not, if there is no absolute necessity for it to be reachable on the public internet, then we will not give it a public IP address, and it will just run in that out-of-band network. Now, the question is, Niels, are you happy running your in-band, out-of-band network? The answer is yes. And I have seen Job's slides, and in his 3rd slide, he is already going to tackle my whole story and try to push my legs away from under me, because this is absolutely nothing that you should ever do. But I can tell you that our uptime on the out-of-band network has been 100%. Since we replaced the core out-of-band routers with SRXs, of course, because we did have a MikroTik there that had a lot of SFP ports and was nice to be configured as a router. But I don't know, maybe I should go back to school, to networking school this time. The MikroTik kept thinking that it was a layer 2 device, and it kept putting locations together on layer 2 at various unpredictable moments in time. And I can tell you one thing, you don't know the definition of the phrase bad day until the day where you have a loop on your out-of-band network, because there are many systems that do not like to see their management Ethernet port being filled by spurious traffic. If you ask me what can I do to improve things? Well, I can tell you that in our case, and I concede, our case is pretty simple because we have a very easy setup network which is fully redundant. But in our case, running an in-band, out-of-band network is feasible. It works. I would advise against using a device that will try to work as a layer 2 device as well. That would not be the best of things to do. So please take that advice. And if you want to know if I can think of any improvements, well, actually, I am enjoying the out-of-band network every day, because every time I log into one of our routers or one of our switches, I use it. And every time a customer logs into our portal to look at this data, they use it. So it works. And the only thing I can think of course, is to implement RPKI on our out-of-band. So I may want to read up on a book about that or something. I don't know. I think that when it comes to out-of-band networks, the setup that we have in our case, we are pretty close to perfection. And well, I would love to hear what you guys think about it. That's it for me.
Thank you, Niels. This is really interesting, and some discussion already, or some acknowledgements are already coming in via IRC. So there's actually people who agree with the way you're building the out-of-band network. And what I think is really interesting is that you are actually using it in production, because what you see happening a lot indeed is that an out-of-band network is built in a lot of cases based on older equipment, which is not in use anymore. So we can use it for the out-of-band network. And then once it's configured and built, it's forgotten until you actually have a problem. So I think that is one of the maybe key lessons from your presentation, at least for myself, that you should actually use the out-of-band.
It is a policy decision. Do you want to use the out-of-band network as a main network and run all your data through it, like metadata, like S-Flow, like whatever? Or do you see the out-of-band network as something that you need just in an emergency? Well, I can tell you that, I've been doing this since 1999, and in various cases, I've been using the out-of-band network just as something that you would use in case of an emergency. And like you say, if you wake up at 3 in the morning, you need to be able to log into your devices if they are down. So you don't want to have to look up on a wiki page, which you can't reach if your device is down, how you would need to log into that device. And this is also a reason why we do not use any like management VRFs or something on our out-of-band network. We just use the Ethernet management port that is provided on the hardware itself. And no VRFs, no strange IP views or additional routing tables. We just keep it simple and keep it in technology terms that everybody can understand, even if that 3 a.m. call comes in.
Okay. A question that came in via the chat. How is your out-of-band network connected to the internet? If you want to talk about it, in other words, how do you access it from outside of the network?
Yeah, we have those 3 VPN servers for that. We have one that runs in our own network, which is connected to public internet and out of band. And we have two from friendly competitors. Hello, Erik. Hello, Thomas, who provide us with links in various data centers. And they also are used to connect to the out-of-band network. Yeah.
And so I suppose this is also based on a question that as you're using your network as part of your production network, I think you manage it 24/7 as well. And so do you have like official maintenance windows, or do you still allow yourself or others to work on it during office hours?
Well, this is a funny one because indeed, once the out-of-band network gets so much use as it does in our case, then indeed you want to start looking at how to make this even more redundant. And management, well, we don't have a maintenance window for the out-of-band network, to be honest. And pretty soon we are going to have to replace one of the switches with one that has more ports. So I do need to think of a strategy for that, because this switch is basically connecting our RPKI validators to the out-of-band network. So this is, as you will understand, Melchior, a very important service. And if we replace that switch, then it would be down. So that is not acceptable. So no, we don't have maintenance windows for the out-of-band network, but we do take care in keeping it managed and keeping it well run. And I intend for things to stay that way.
Okay, thank you, Niels. And we'll be back with you in short time. I just heard that Job is ready for his part of the presentation, so really interested to hear what other ideas and options are available. Job, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. My name is Job Snijders. I work for NTT's global IP network, and today I want to share with you how NTT has set up its out-of-band management network. So, independent of whatever you call your in-band network. So in this very NLNOG live session, this phone is my out-of-band service with which I am in touch with the AV crew to orchestrate the event. But the production network, so to speak, is my webcam and its connection to the internet. And it is very interesting to take a careful look at how interwoven is my internet network with other networks, and how do the dependencies work, and how can I reduce the dependencies on my own network by building an out-of-band network. What is an out-of-band network useful for? There are many, many applications. Niels highlighted a few. In the case of NTT's network, we have a few specific things that we use this specific out-of-band network for. There is routine operations. These are scheduled activities that are planned, put on a roster, and people take care of it. And you can think of things like upgrading the router software. When on a really big router, those chassis-based devices, you upgrade the software. It is very nice to have the equivalent of a sort of VGA and keyboard connector into the device to guide the device through its software update procedure. In a similar fashion, when physical work is performed on the device, physical work which may impact the surface, for instance, if a line card or fabric card is affected, it's good to have this second connection into your device. And there's, of course, incidents. When a router disappears from our in-band network, our production network, it can have many causes. It could be a management failure, management blade failure, it could be other hardware components, it could be a power outage in the data center, it could be a fiber cut. And having an out-of-band network that is reliably not depending on your own network can help triage such situations to very quickly understand what is going on. So NTT operates multiple autonomous systems. There is, of course, 2914, which you all know and love, but separately from 2914, we have a different ASN on different routers with different upstream providers on different connections with a different routing policy. It is separate. And that is our IPOOB. And to understand why I'm so enthusiastic about this new IP-based out-of-band network, I would like to offer a picture of our previous out-of-band network, which was more anchored in how you would envision a traditional telco switchboard. What we previously did was we would order a phone line into each and every POP where NTT has equipment, regardless of where on the planet it is. That phone line hooks up to a modem. The modem hooks up to the aux port, auxiliary port of a console server. And once we reach the console server, we could branch out via serial connections to the individual components that are part of the out-of-band network. But the trouble with this is that in many places it has become increasingly hard to order true phone lines suitable for this type of data transfer. More and more providers are pretending to offer a POTS service, a plain old telephone service, but are behind the scenes converting it through various VoIP codecs, which destroy the ability for us to interact with such devices. There were more downsides. For instance, this system was only used when needed, and when you need it, discovering that it's broken or that the phone line got disconnected or whatnot is of course suboptimal. And ordering phone lines is just, it's very, very challenging. So when we looked at out-of-band and what we need, what are our requirements, what we were looking for is that all management modules, so the management blades in all our routers are connected permanently via an RS-232 connection to some kind of device, which we can access through SSH, which in turn is, of course, accessed via IP, wrapped in IPsec, all the way back to our operations center. We want all serial lines to be concurrently available because maybe people are troubleshooting something on multiple devices at the same time. And if it's a single user or a single line device, that's not optimal. We want all serial traffic to be logged for debugging and archiving purposes. And we wanted a system where multiple users can work concurrently on the same serial lines. Furthermore, simplicity. A cookie stamp recipe was desired so that it's very easy to turn up new out-of-band gear without having to jump through a lot of steps. And then finally, we need flexibility in how we connect these out-of-band routers in our POPs to other parts of the out-of-band network. We wanted flexibility that we can choose between 4G, which in some data centers works and some it doesn't, optical, electrical, single mode, multi-mode, you name it. We wanted all options. So this was the solution colleagues arrived at. It is a Cisco 4331 device, which has the very interesting capability of providing lots of asynchronous ports. You can stick up to 48 serial connections in this device if you wire it up with the correct modules and cables. You can put WAN modules in it of various kinds, which offers you the flexibility that I mentioned before. And this device is hooked up to a Juniper switch, which can be used to extend the out-of-band network without requiring additional out-of-band wide area network connections. So if we need more than 48 serial ports, we can just drop in a second one of these, connect it to the switch, and the way the network is configured, all of this comes up easily and automatically. And yes, the cool thing here is that we are using serial connections. The great advantage of using serial connections is that they have less of a dependency on the health of the management blade. Also, via a serial connection, you cannot cause a layer 2 loop. And there have been multiple providers over the years that have reported that they connected their out-of-band Ethernet ports or the Ethernet management ports on the management blades into some kind of layer 2 construction, and a loop appears, and these management Ethernet ports have zero protection whatsoever to deal with a broadcast storm. And this really can bring down entire nations. So by focusing on the serial interface on all equipment as the primary means for the out-of-band network, we get a lot of cool observations. For instance, if a kernel crashes, some kernels can still spit out some debugging information on the serial console line, but it's also a safety mechanism. What that looks like. Here is a photo of an installation that is yet to be wired to all equipment. But what you see on the left side of the screen is a big trunk of green cables, which go into a specialized multiple serial port per physical connector. And that branches out into a cable per serial line that goes into a patch panel, and from there it's very easy to connect everything up. And you also see the layer 2 switch, which can be used to extend the network or hook up other devices that need some kind of out-of-band connection. And this is such a joy to work with. I can recommend it to everybody. So what does this look like on a more logical level? In the lower left, we have the OOB spoke. That's that Cisco 4331 connected to the OOB switch. And from there, multiple spokes can be connected in a daisy chain style. And from the OOB spoke, you branch out via RS-232 connections to every device in the POP that has a serial port. The out-of-band spoke gets its internet from competitors of NTT. We have made a very careful selection of suitable suppliers and analyzed how traffic from the spoke to the hub would flow, and if there are dependencies on NTT or not. But of course, you never know for sure. So there's multiple IP OOB hubs, and each hub is on a different continent with different suppliers. So we increased the chances of a spoke being able to reach at least one of the hubs. Between spokes and hubs, we use DMVPN and IPsec. This makes dynamic IP addresses on the OOB spoke side easy. It makes them a non-issue. We don't need to register anything. It just works. Then on top of this, BGP runs, which helps distribute the routing information within the out-of-band network, which is a real autonomous system connected to the real internet. And then the hubs are the entry point from a device called the console server. And we're going to focus on that in a second. The operator connects to the centralized console server, and from there, via SSH, the system jumps to the spoke, and then you are dropped into the serial line. So some of the considerations. We use a different ASN that is a real internet ASN for this operation. The DMVPN hubs have their own globally unique prefixes to reduce the dependence, to have no dependency on the NTT 2914 network. And we took special precautions and put in a lot of effort to carefully select which networks would be suitable to deliver us this type of service. The configs on both the hubs and the spokes are static, but the robustness comes from the fact that all of it is done with dynamic routing protocols. So whether we reboot a hub or certain connections or sessions go up or down, the system should automatically reroute to a better path. Not NTT in this context really just means that, to the best of our understanding, the provider has no dependency on NTT, specifically to handle the traffic from the spoke to the hub. Not to elsewhere, not to the whole internet. We purchased these transit services actually for just a tiny portion of connectivity, just hub and spoke. No other internet services are used. So this conserver thing, what is it? Conserver is magic. If you go to conserver.com, you can download this tool for free. It is an open source tool that may give you a bit of a Unix feel, an old-C time-C feel, but actually it is quite modern software. It is actively maintained and it is very useful. What Conserver does for us, it provides us with a multiplexer that has multi-user support and has allows for incredible freedom how exactly you connect to a specific console. So what is a console? The console is that serial port in the management blade. That is basically a VGA plus keyboard equivalent, except it's without colors and a bit simpler. It's character-based. And these consoles must be reached somehow, and this can be either via a direct serial line connected to the conserver server itself, or it could be transported over SSH and done via some Cisco terminal server. Any way you want to connect to serial lines, the conserver is extendable and allows great flexibility in this regard. And conserver is really important for us because we're managing thousands of serial connections, and it is without some kind of organization, without some consistent approach, it would be very hard for us humans to exactly memorize how do we connect to a specific console on a specific device. So conserver provides us sort of an abstraction layer between the nitty-gritty details of how the wires are actually connected and how you reach them and what needs to be done to accomplish that connection, and the user just jumping on it, or multiple users jumping on it. What conserver also offers us is persistent logging. So whatever happens on these consoles, it is stored in log files, so we can go back in time to, for instance, correlate a pop outage with what we saw as a dying gasp on the serial lines. And through conserver, we are able to monitor whether the serial connections actually work and are wired correctly. Because if you wire up all kinds of devices and somehow two cables got swapped, in a moment of urgency, that is inconvenient. So we have programs that could repeatedly confirm that the serial connections are working as expected. And I think this type of monitoring is crucial to any operation. So what does it look like? On a Unix shell, you can type in the command console. The console command is the binary that clients use to interact with the conserver daemon. And if I am on this host and I type in console and then a string of characters, in this instance, it showed me that there is in fact two management blades, two RSPs, each of them connected with serial connection. And I have to pick which of the two I want to connect to. So I complete my command, and then I'm dropped into the serial connection of that management blade in that Amsterdam POP. And if a colleague of mine would issue the same command, they are able to view what I am seeing, and if necessary, they can take over the write access to that specific serial line. So this makes it super easy for multiple people to look at the same screen, which during upgrade or emergency procedures can be very beneficial. So conserver really is a collaborative tool, but not based in JavaScript. Periodic maintenance. Since we have DMVPN sessions, IPsec, SSH needs to work, the RS-232 needs monitoring. All of this is shoved into systems that will alert the entity NOG when something is not working as expected. And this helps us ensure that the out-of-band network is available when we actually need it. We have a regression tool called Botmeester, and that does the trickery with the RS-232 connections to verify if they are indeed connected properly. So yes, monitor your out-of-band network. And it's kind of funny because an out-of-band network, the way NTT uses it, like through routine operations and emergency operations, the out-of-band network doesn't need to be up that much. If we're lucky, if the out-of-band network is 5% up of the time, that might be enough. But of course, that would be a weird way of thinking. So the out-of-band network, despite not being used continuously, is marked as critical, and with all connectivity providers involved, we have commercial arrangements to ensure that we can get expedient support when needed. But uptime could be optional for this type of network because we're not running production traffic through this network. It is merely for incidental management. So I feel this is a big difference with the Niels approach. And well, this concludes my presentation. I would love to know what you guys think, what questions you have, and I would like to point out that the best out-of-band is Tenacious D. Thank you for listening.
Job, thanks for that presentation, and I think it's interesting to see the difference between solution NTT implemented and what Fusix implemented. First of all, there were some appreciation shown for the conserver tool. So that is, I think, something more people will look into now. And we also received some questions. Specifically, question first for you, Job. I've seen a console cable in the out-of-band switch. How is that one managed? Does it also go to the 4331? In other words, is the switch connecting the console server connected to the console server?
Yes. And there's another detail I omitted because I was focusing very heavily on the out-of-band part of the network. But the backup connection for each of these 4331 terminal servers is in-band. So if our out-of-band provider is unavailable, it may negatively impact the work we can do in a certain POP. But if it happens to be work on a router that is not the uplink of the out-of-band connection itself, then maybe the work can proceed. So we use non-NTT providers, but we also, as a backup, have the NTT backbone itself.
So, sorry, Niels. One more question first for specifically for Job. As you're using serial consoles, do you by default dismiss hardware that doesn't offer a serial console when evaluating hardware for your network?
Yes, effectively we do. If a vendor comes to pitch their hardware and decent management is not possible, then it will be hard to make the sale. And this is interesting because if you look at servers nowadays, you have iDRAC and Elom, which are actually separate computers inside the server. So if you somehow manage to connect into that separate computer, you can still do power management and you still have control over the chassis. But if you look at modern day Junipers and Ciscos, especially the high-end models, there is no separate computer to do these environmental or hardware operations. This is really where serial is then the best next thing available to us. But it would be interesting if more vendors would take the actual separate computer built into the router to help with out-of-band management.
Question for both of you. Do you have procedures in place in case a out-of-bound router or similar device fails? In other words, that sort of ties back to the question, do you treat your out-of-band network as a production network? So are there procedures in place? Are devices under support?
For us, I can say that the devices that we use in the out-of-band network are usually under support for the core devices. The other ones we have spares here in stock, and we do keep backups of the configuration like they were production routers. So if something would fail on the out-of-band network, then obviously there is no service that is down. Customers are still up. So we would proceed to replace the hardware as soon as possible with the configuration that we have in the backup store using oxidized for this.
Okay.
Yeah, it's similar for us. All our all devices under support. When an out-of-band device fails, there are procedures in place to either replace it from our own stock, or there's an arrangement with a distributor to replace the device. But also, these devices are not needed for our production network. So if there were to be a maintenance in a POP where the device somehow is failed, we just postpone that maintenance. That's part of our procedures as well. And as it happens to be, knock on wood, the mean time between failure of this type of terminal server happens to be quite good. So we don't see this too often.
Yeah. I would like to point out something about serial console servers. One of Job's colleagues in the Tier 1 networking department, the guys from Sweden, had a huge 2-day outage on their biggest chassis in Amsterdam about 8 months ago, where they had replaced all the parts of the whole thing. And in the end, it turned out to be the console server sending garbage data to the console port and the routing engine killing itself. Please configure your console servers correctly so they don't send garbage.
Yes, pick a good console server, one that you know and have tested extensively.
Job, a question came in. Niels was telling during his presentation that they're actually using the out-of-band network to configure the production network and devices. Are you doing the same? Because you presented that you have Botmeester checking the devices if they're reachable and if console works, but do you use out-of-band to configure the network as well, or is it only out-of-band?
Out-of-band serial lines are used to turn up equipment. So equipment will be shipped to a pod. The first thing that's connected is serial, then power, and then the serial connection can be used to bootstrap the device to a config that it can reach the management host, and we can push the full config to the device. But during normal operations, unless it's something like a software upgrade, these connections are not used. We use in-band SSH-based management to configure all devices.
Niels, do you think, are there any, let's say, rules of sort of baselines you can use depending on, because your network is a little bit smaller than entity's network? Could you say that it depends on the size of the network, which solution to choose, or how did you come up with your solution? Where did you get the ideas from? For example, it's not that common to run BGP in your out-of-band network. Where did you get those ideas from, and what made you make those decisions?
Yeah, I think the most important part is that you need to decide what your out-of-band network is for. And this is why I like the fact that Job has presented about NTT and the fact that they use the out-of-band actually just for serial, while for us it is a daily tool that, once, to be honest, we started using the out-of-band ports for things. And I think it was that I wanted to check if we could run the RPKI validators through out-of-band. And then, that worked. Okay, so, and then worse, it became more and more that started to run through the out-of-band network. So I think the first thing is that policy decision for yourself. What do I want to run across the out-of-band network? And then you make the architecture that fits that policy decision. And obviously for us, the tool to use is BGP. That's the thing we all love, right?
I agree. I mean, without BGP, it's not real.
I think that is a very nice.
Right. It's
Go ahead, Job.
We both call it out-of-band networks, but it turns out that it's where we have entirely different definitions of what an out-of-band network is. And I think for NTT, we were so used to using a phone line to dial into the serial line. And we loved the serial line part, but we did not like the phone line part. So when we set out to design this new generation IP OOP, it went live in 2017, 2018. All we were really looking to replace was those darn phone lines, but the rest, that was great.
Especially since those phone lines are basically now running over IP anyway, so that doesn't really make it out of band.
Yeah. And they are so expensive. You dial from Dallas into Brazil using a phone line. Yeah, it's cheaper to get some cross connects.
Yeah, so I think that the conclusion is probably that the approach is sort of the same as a production network, right? First scope what it is for, gather your requirements, and then start building. Out-of-bound network is not just something you need to have, but really needs time and a good design and lots of considerations. Any last remarks in that perspective, Niels?
Actually, not from me. I hope that we have contributed to a more stable internet that is better manageable. And if people want to know more about how we run this, then I'm sure they will know how to find me.
Job, you already made the statement. We all love BGP, but do you want to add something? I think, unfortunately, we lost Job. So,
yeah.
With that, this is, I think, the moment to conclude this presentation, and with that, we are concluding presentations for today. So, Niels, thank you. Job, thank you as well.
My apologies.
And with that, I would
switch
like
to a different internet connection.
You're back. So the question was, do you have any last words on out-of-bound networking?
Yes. Invest real money into it. It pays itself back so easily, because if a software upgrade goes wrong or a device is fried and you need to, at a deeper level of the system's boot procedure, take some action, it is absolutely invaluable to have this type of equipment and have immediate access, because remote hands is not cheap. The bill of materials that I listed may not seem that cheap, but if you think it through and you depreciate it over 5 years, it is such a cheap insurance policy to ensure the well-being and health of your network. It pays itself back easily. So when you look for out-of-band network, do not be afraid to look at what you may perceive as more luxurious or more expensive solutions, because if you take the whole thing into consideration, then the difference between a €300 device and a €3,000 device can be ignored. It's not relevant. So invest in out-of-band networks and treat them well, treat them with love and respect.
With that, I think this are brilliant words to conclude this short discussion. Nathalie, back to you.
Yes, thank you. And I would like to thank all of you viewers and participants for joining us today. We really hope you had a good and useful time. We really enjoyed doing this NLNOG Live. We have been working behind the scenes quite hard to hopefully make a good program. And so I would like to thank the speakers, Job and Niels, Melchior for moderating, Steven, Jochem, Evelyn and Massimo for doing an outstanding job. It's not easy to present virtual. Also, I would like to thank the speakers again. Again, we can't do this without them. So here they go, the full list again, in the opposite order of earlier this afternoon. Thank you. Big thanks to NLNet Labs, Asteroid, Solid Optics, Duocast, RETN, Cybersprint, LoneApp, M6, Arista, PC Extreme, Ripe NCC, NLIX, KPN, Juniper Networks, eBay, i3DNet, SpeedIX, and Alterna. Final words, we have another event here on the 4th of September. If you have any suggestions for topics for presentations, or if you would like to present yourself, just drop us an email. You can find our contact details on the website nlnog.net, or drop it in the IRC chat. Thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you back on the 4th of September. Stay tuned. Bye-bye.